here this morning. You're finding me in Edinburgh in my home study. I'm Jarita Holbrook. I have a very, very strong introduction. And I never thought about how I introduce myself as being important, except for other black people who know me are like, Jarita, introduce yourself. Because I really get a kick out of how I introduce myself. So, I'm Jarita Holbrook. I'm the world's expert on African indigenous astronomy, and I study all the bad behaviors of astrophysicists. So I have two strands of research. That's how I introduce myself. You want to go next, Tana?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tana Joseph. I'm a South African astronomer. I'm currently in the Netherlands, so it's about 2 p.m. here in Western Europe. And I am a trained X-ray astronomer. I study binary star systems outside of our galaxy. And I'm also the Equity and Inclusion Officer for Dutch Astronomy. And I work in sort of promoting anti-racism, decolonization, equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts in science academia. And the person that actually gave me a break in this and led to my formal career in the sort of social justice work in astronomy and the sciences is Professor Jarita Holbrook, who was asked to give a talk at a conference, but was too busy and important to do it. And then she suggested me. And basically it's just, I'm living proof of the power of putting people on, of just being, pass it on to someone else and not being afraid to share the stage. And I will always be grateful to Jarita for that. And I think she's a fantastic role model, and I'm very honored to be on the panel with her today and with all these other amazing women.
Aw, is it my turn? I'll go. That was so cute. Hi, everyone. I'm Moya McTeer. By training, I am an astrophysicist and a folklorist. I specialized in the galactic habitable zone. So all of the cool, messy intersections of exoplanet habitability, stellar dynamics, and galactic evolution. And as a folklorist, I specialize in like the creation and function of folklore, which I do a lot of fictional world building for. But my work is that I am a freelance science communicator. So that I know that the other two on the panel are also science communicators, but I do not have a boss, which is nice. So we can talk about that if we want.
I want to say that I'm actually not a science communicator.
Oh. I think you do the work of a science communicator, even if you don't identify.
I know. I'm just a like professor researcher who got clever, right? And that, yes, as everyone knows, I tend to when I write research proposals, as part of the giving back to the public, I often make a documentary film, right, attached to the research. And in fact, Tana is in like 2 or 3 of my next upcoming documentary films attached to my Astro project. So yeah, my number 1 job is researching, right? My number 2, 3, and 4 are like communicator and fiction writer, all that other stuff. So
no, you do so much.
All of you all do y'all do a lot for this community, right? And so I'm gonna toss it over to Cheyenne. Who is going to begin with our very first question.
Yes, so it's really amazing to have like full on like girl power on this panel here today. But I guess the question is, since there's not many of us and we're trying to show the world that we exist in all of our different forms, all of our different identities. The question is, what did your family think when you told them that you decided that you wanted to be an astronomer or be an astrophysicist? It's a question for any of the panel.
I'll go. I like this question because my family has been sort of the main driver for me in my career. there's a lot of research that shows like, if you can't see it, you can't be it if you can't see it, or you need role models, and all this kind of stuff. But growing up in South Africa in the 90s, this before the internet and stuff like that. And there's more research to actually show that when it comes to girls getting into science and choosing science as a subject, your parents' permission is basically the main driver around that. And I had my parents' full support. So this is without any role. I have no science role models. I became an astrophysicist without having, people always ask me that. I'm like, I don't have any. I saw some Hubble pictures in the newspaper when I was 10 years old. And that's what made me decide to be a scientist. But it's with the full support of especially my parents. And when I say that, I mean, that show Dance Moms or like Toddlers and Tiaras. It's like that, but for science. So my parents are just like super enthusiastic, super supportive. And they never let people get me down. If people said, oh, what's that? We don't do that here in South Africa. That's for NASA. You have to be from the US or things like that. Or why do you want to do that? You need to go and work for your family. My parents wouldn't even let me answer. They would just step in and say, no, we know our child. We know what she's passionate about. We know what she can do in this world. And we trust her judgment. And I was like 11 years old, 10, 11 years old. My parents were like, no, we know our child. We know what she's like. She's not cut out to be an accountant. This is what she's going to do. So I've had that unwavering support of especially my parents and the rest of my family as well. My sister, who's also a scientist, who's a few years younger than me, she reminded me recently that she did astronomy courses in undergrad to be able to understand the work that I was doing at master's level. So she did undergrad astronomy courses just to be able to, to be more knowledgeable so that she could support me in that way. She's a chemist. So I've had a lot of support in a lot of different ways from my family. They're very proud of me. They don't always all understand what I'm doing, except for my sister, who actually has formal training in astronomy a little bit. But they are extremely proud and extremely supportive. And that is, that for me was the difference. So it's not just about, and it's also a cultural thing, right? Because we know when what we're doing goes just beyond our, us having PhDs and stuff. It's about the pride that the community takes. And when I am on TV or on the radio, people will text my mom and say, oh, we saw your daughter, we're so proud, and all this kind of stuff. And that makes me proud as well. So it goes just beyond your family, but also the extended family, the community. And that's something I didn't really appreciate growing up, the kind of ripples and the impact that this will have. And that feedback really makes me, especially when things are tough, it really makes me, it makes me feel strong, it makes me feel inspired, and it makes me feel that weight of responsibility that I need to do my best because people are watching. And people are rooting for me, and I don't want to let them down.
No, I love that so much. And I love that your sister was that dedicated. Like, I think to this day, my family doesn't know what my degree was about. They're like, yeah, she's probably going to end up working for NASA. That's as much as I know. And they kind of leave it as that. I'm like, guys, I'm in Europe. I think NASA is a bit far away, but that's what they tell everyone. So that's fine. I'd love to hear the stories of the other panelists of what was your family's reaction when you said, I want to be an astronomer, an astrophysicist?
Sure. Yeah. So my mom always wanted me to be a scientist or an engineer. She is in academia, but on the humanities side, she's an English professor and was getting her PhD in English when I was growing up. So I was very surrounded by academic culture, but not scientific academic culture. And that was kind of a rude awakening. But she always wanted me to be a scientist. When I got to college, I was more interested in folklore. We had a whole thing where we didn't talk for a while, but then I did find astronomy and she was like, okay, you're following in the direction I want you to go again. But she For some reason, she didn't think that astronomy would give me the same stability that she imagined other sciences would give me. And so even though I was like, no, Mom, I'm doing what you've always wanted me to do, she was really confused. She was like, but that's not a practical science. That's not one that you'll get a job in. And she now understands what I do. She now understands the science communication side of things, and she's very proud of me. She doesn't understand my research at all. But it's always been interesting to me that people have this idea that astronomy is much less practical, much less applicable, much less useful than other sciences. And that also kind of influences the way that people see us when we say we're going to study it.
Yeah, definitely. I think people tend to be surprised when they find out how much maths and like coding and like all that stuff you can learn from an astronomy degree. And they kind of, they had someone, I told them I was in finance, but my background was in astronomy. And they said, oh, like, why are you there messing with people's money? And I'm like, you do realize astronomy is maths, right? Like, like anything with numbers is like what I did every day. But yeah, like you say, that misconception is definitely there.
I had to tell my mom, like, no, it's one of the most hireable degrees.
Literally. Dr. Holbrook, what about you?
Yeah, so it's my answer is always complicated because yes, I decided very young that I wanted to be an astrophysicist, but that's not what my parents wanted me to do. Right? Again, it's kind of a Moya narrative where, you know, and it took probably until I was about 27 until my mother finally gave up on me becoming a medical doctor. And at that time, I already had a master's degree in astronomy, right, when I was 27. And I can tell you that we were in Africa visiting my sister. My sister was a Peace Corps volunteer in Guinea. And we were actually in Mali, in Bamako. And it was my mother and my play aunt were traveling together, and I was with them because I could speak some West African French, so I was doing all the translation. And we had the opportunity to go to a hospital in Bamako, and so we go marching into this hospital, and you know the American visitors, the Black American visitors, and we walk into this room where they're performing like surgery on a kid. Right, and like there's blood, and I like just pivot and walk right back out. Right, I was like, oh, boom! I was out, and I sat outside waiting for my mom and my aunt to come out of this experience of watching part of this surgery. And my mom came and she sat down next to me, and I think that was the moment when she gave up. Finally, like this kid who's now 27 is not going to be a medical doctor. But at the same time, I'm not the only professor in my family, and things that I kind of put together much later in life. It's like my father's degree is in science education, right? His bachelor's degree. So he used to sit us down and teach us mathematics when we were very, very young. So, I was always exposed to this. My grandparents, were professors at Alcorn State. So I visited university campuses when I was an infant, crawling around on university campuses. So it was not something that was strange. Going to university and becoming an academic was not totally strange to me. What was strange to me was how people thought it was strange, right? And it's the same case with, all of our families, that they didn't necessarily understand the nuances of what I was doing as, for my physics degree and then my astronomy degree and then my PhD in astronomy and astrophysics. I had to explain in the most simple terms to some of my relatives, when I was studying planetary nebulas, I'm studying gas balls in space, very, very, very simple terms, because they're like, I want to brag about you to my friends, but I don't know exactly what to say. And then there was a pivotal moment when I was working for NASA between my master's and my PhD. And I left, it was like a 6-month contract. So I was there for 6 months, and then I went off to get my PhD at UC Santa Cruz. And my family, that was something they could hang their hat on. Like, oh, she works for NASA. So you guys have all mentioned NASA, right? And then when I left, it's like, you gave up that NASA job? What are you doing? Right? Are you in, what? So they're always very supportive, and even though they didn't understand what I was doing, they knew that I was one of those, right? Because we have a lot of math people on one side of my family, and African American families are complex. I do not want to convey that I have this like totally sedity, academic family. We have our jailbirds too, right? We have those people who can't keep a job, right? The ones who mooch off of it. We have it all. This is just the complexities of a family. But I do want to say that I went to Fairfax High School, which is in the shadow of Hollywood. And at one point, people were like, oh, you must go back and speak at your high school. They must be so proud. And I'm like, Timothy Hutton and Demi Moore and some of the Jacksons went, and like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, they all went to my high school. When they list the famous people, I'm not on that list. I am not.
You should be.
Yeah, so no, I've never been invited back to Fairfax High School to give a talk. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Ashley, did you want to jump in? Oh, okay.
I was coming, but I didn't know if you all could hear that it was a siren in the background. So when we talk about living in, we talk about the complexities of African American culture, right? I live in the hood, okay? I live on the south side of Chicago in the Inglewood neighborhood. So I live right down the street from a fire station. As you can hear, I don't know what just happened, but something just happened, and I'm gonna tell my cat to go be nosy. Give me one more second. I think they're almost done. Are they going back and forth? No, they're just going straight. Okay. All right. So thank you for that, about all of you all's background. I think that's extremely important as we look at cultural astronomy, and as we think about the different intersections that we all bring for cultural astronomy. But I do want to ask my auntie this question. So for those that don't know in the audience, by astronomy technicality, Jarita is my auntie. So, and so with this being said, as a filmmaker and cultural astronomer that travels the world, what is something that most people don't realize when it comes to Black and African astronomical culture, but also what else can they learn about the lives of the African indigenous cultures?
Okay, so I did make some notes about this to start by saying that, there's not that many people of African descent who are in astronomy and astrophysics. So it is small enough to feel like a family, but it's getting to be big enough to fractionalize, right? Now, we have our people slinging mud at each other, being mad, and, oh, they said this, and they said that, So it's big enough to fractionalize now. We don't have to be like 100% have each other's back, which when we were smaller, it was kind of like, no, you can't. Don't speak bad about each other because there's too few of us, right? Now, some of the fights between the Black astrophysicists are quite public, quite public. And I see that as being healthy too. So we shouldn't have to censor it. I mean, we're all different people with all different personalities, and you're just not going to get along with everybody. It's perfectly healthy. So I don't begrudge people their grudges. What can we learn from African cultures? A whole lot in terms of sky knowledge. I'm always getting surprised at the things that I learned as I'm going through learning cultural astronomy from various cultures around the world, including Africans. And I think that Moya probably has an understanding of this from her folklore background, but just the many ways that astronomy is interwoven in indigenous cultures. But we don't think about the way that astronomy is interwoven in our own culture, right? So even in the United States, I used to, when I had time, I used to listen to the American Top 40 because I'll admit it, I like pop music. more than almost anything else. I just like popular music. People are like, you like jazz? I'm like, oh, that's okay. I'm like, that's okay. I just like popular music. So this is very lowbrow. I used to go listen to the American Top 40 and identify how many songs had astronomy related lyrics, galaxies and moons and stars. And usually there's at least three, in the top 20 of the top 40 are pulling on the astronomy imagery to convey like endurance or impossibility or, and so I haven't like published anything on that, but I that's part of our astronomy and culture in the United States. And of course, there's Afrofuturism. I write Afrofuturism, so Afrofuturism, and African-centered images of the future and of outer space exploration, which I think is very, very appropriate since Octavia Butler's birthday was yesterday. Looking forward to the results of the haiku competition this year. I submitted something this year. I submitted something last year. Hopefully, what got me this year is I'm a huge Star Wars geek. That said, I haven't watched the new stuff on Disney Plus, so I haven't seen any of the new stuff, but the classics, Star Wars, yeah. So, and when I saw that the gifts this year were all the Star Wars stuff, I was like, okay, I have to try again. Maybe I'll get some more Star Wars swag. So I'll let everyone else. I guess you guys have different questions, but I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, we had a special guest this year for our in-person. So it was very, very amazing. Cheyenne, you want to get us back on track?
Yeah, so just a question out to everyone again. Again, going into like backgrounds, just navigating the world, like how did being a Black person in this space, like how did that change how you navigated the world, traveling the world? Like some of you have been all over different countries just as your career. Like how do you think that shaped your experience to where you are now?
I'm only grateful for all the travel I've been able to do through astronomy and through SciComm. I think that's one of the biggest advantages or benefits of being an astronomer, that often you get to travel to these cool places to observe or do a conference. But I also get to travel to cool places to talk to other people, which is awesome. And so I've had so many trips that have opened my eyes in a lot of different ways. I've had trips where I was walking through Iceland and someone stopped me on the street to ask me if I knew I was Black. And I was like, yes, no one has let me forget that my entire life. Don't you worry. And so I got to learn about how race is seen in other parts of the world. I had the chance to go to South Africa, and I unfortunately didn't meet you, Tana. I don't think I knew that you existed yet. It was back in 2019. And I got to talk to young South African students about my journey, and I got to see the light go off in their eyes when they realized that they could do stuff like this too. So yeah, I've had so many amazing and some questionable experiences traveling, but I know that those experiences would have been different if I was not a Black woman. And so it's just like always there in my mind. But usually, knock on whatever wood is available in this room, usually they have been good experiences.
Anybody else want to share their experiences?
Well, I'll touch on something that is actually in Jarita's research, and I talk about it in one of her films, so a bit of a trailer / spoiler, if that's okay, Jarita. So kind of fantastic, amazing experiences, certainly. One of the things that stands out for me is how the perception of my race changes in different places. So that what you just said now, Moya, the idea that I am recategorized in different ways, and being South African who was born during apartheid, with strict race categories, and having gone to, for instance, a race segregated schools and things like that, was very eye-opening. For instance, when I went to the US for the first time, and it's so awkward because Trevor Noah, a mixed race South African comedian who's very famous in the US, has a stand-up routine about this exact thing that happened to him that also happened to me. So people think that I'm ripping him off. I'm like, no, this literally happened to me in Boston, please. This is how it is in Massachusetts. Where I quickly found out that I was not Black, that I was seen as Latina. And I've had tias in shops scold me for being a second generation immigrant whose parents didn't teach her Spanish. And I had to show them my passport and be like, I'm South African. The Spanish didn't come all the way down here. I speak English because we were English colony, and I speak Afrikaans because we were a Dutch colony. Or when I'm in the UK, people assume that, even Black people assume that I am mixed race in some way, or mixed with white, basically, in some way. And so these are all very, very interesting experiences here where I am in the Netherlands, not in Amsterdam. So not in a big population center in a city in the north. A couple of weeks ago, the weather got really nice and I started wearing my hair out, my afro for the first time in the summer. And turns out Dutch children love an afro, and they cycle past me and they wave and they smile, even babies, like they're absolutely captivated by afros. So it's been very interesting to see people's reaction to me in that way. And there's also been, negative impacts of being Black and being specifically a Black woman navigating academia. And this is the part that's in Jarita's excellent research and in her film, is where I talk about one time when I was finishing up my PhD and looking on AAS job register, where they advertise all the academic jobs around the world. And I was a PhD student in the UK, in England. My supervisor is a guy called Professor Tom McEnroe. He's a white guy from the US. And he was sitting next to me and we're going through all these jobs on job register, these postdoctoral positions that I was getting ready to apply for. And there was one in Alabama. And scientifically, it lined up really, really well with the work that I was doing. And you said to me, look, scientifically, yes, I would say you should apply. But what you need to know is that if you went on your own to Alabama, this was around 2012, 2013, you would be fine. But at the time I was dating a white guy, an Irish guy, and he said, but the two of you together walking around holding hand in the streets, I'm not 100% comfortable with you doing that. And I wouldn't feel comfortable sending you into that environment with Jack, my boyfriend at the time. And so we decided that I wouldn't apply for that job because it would mean that my boyfriend wouldn't be able to come either with me or come and visit me. And that really I found that very startling. And so there was that first moment where it was like, I was told, because of your race and because of the makeup of your interracial relationship, you might not be safe in a certain place. And so that job opportunity will have to be put aside. And so that was obviously very disappointing, but also very jarring. And I thought that I would be better at handling that, given, my background growing up in South Africa, where race is so on the forefront of things, to the point where I often tell people, I think of myself as Black first, and then a woman, and then queer. For a lot of people, it's different, but growing up in South Africa, and that's very specific content, it's race first. And when I went to the UK as a PhD student, where in Europe, they don't really like to talk about race. They're very scared because they know what they did. They very focused on gender parity. And again, when I say gender, they just mean the two genders, gender binary, which we know is an incomplete view of gender. And so when I went to the UK as a PhD student, my cohort, my year had a lot of women in it. And so suddenly I was a woman in STEM. I was no longer Black in STEM. I was no longer Black girl magic. Was before hashtag Black girl magic was a thing. But now I was suddenly, my race wasn't important, it was just my gender. And so kind of trying to put all of that together and my queerness, and trying to bring that all together, like, as a queer Black woman in science, and I have an invisible disability. And, there's different parts to everyone. There's some that are very obvious and some not so obvious, but how these things come together to impact your opportunities, and how people perceive you and how you move through the world and move through academia, is an ongoing process, and something that, why, this work that we do is so important, from the folklore to the research into Indigenous astronomy, to kind of show people there's different aspects to this. There's, and we all contain multitudes, and astronomy contains multitudes. And so, yeah, so that's been my experience, and it's still ongoing. I'm still learning how people react to me being the person that I am. One thing that's also coming up now is an age thing, where I look much younger than I am. I'm starting to plan my 40th birthday. I'll be 40 next year. And so that's also something where I say, in 4 days, it's the 10-year anniversary of my PhD graduation. And that makes people skeptical, because they're like, okay, so not only are you telling me that you are a Black woman with an astrophysics PhD, but you're some kind of baby genius as well. I'm like, no, I'm actually older. Like, this is my real job. Like, these are not lies. This is my lived reality. So there's all these things that come in to how you're perceived, and how, like I said, how you move through the world, and how the world moves around you, that we're still, like, that we're all trying to unpack. And the more we tell our stories, and the more, we show up and tell people our stories, the more, like Monia said, your eyes can open, and the more stuff that Jarita uncovers in her research, the better it is for everyone.
I love that you brought up the looking young thing, because I imagine that's going to be something we all deal with.
Exactly. I deal with it all the time.
Yeah, and even our perception of, like age. Like, I've had a white colleague in astrophysics who's known me since I was a student say to me, I don't know how to judge the age of Black people. And she
just came right out and said it.
Yeah, because I wasn't the only Black person in the research group at the time. And like this, she was vastly outnumbered. This was in the African context, a white woman in South Africa. And so she basically was like, she had no idea that one of her students was the age that they were. And she only put it together from context clues talking about their family structure and so on. And then she turned to me because she felt that she could express this. She's like, I really struggle with this, and I didn't realize it. And it's something that she did acknowledge, it's something she needs to work on. But it is something that, that they struggle, that white people struggle with, and white people are the majority of our colleagues. And so they're not only looking at us as Black people, they're also looking at us as, we would say, where I'm from, as a lighty. A lighty is like, like a young person who doesn't have a lot of experience, and you don't really necessarily have to take them that seriously. And then you have to advocate for yourself as an expert and as someone with experience, on top of the soft bigotry of lowered expectations due to your race and your gender. It's a lot.
Lowered expectations, but drastically higher standards. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
No, those are fluid standards, right? They just change to exclude you, right? Which I study that as well. Like, anyway, but oftentimes it's, well, we're going to go a little academic right now, because I study this. And I had a theory that I've been working on for at least 15 years, which I call every Black person but their own. And then, when I say it, do you guys know what I'm talking about? So, me traveling around the world, what's important to external people is that I'm American, right? So I'm American. I'm educated in America. I went to some of the best schools in America, but nobody ever pays attention to that until I'm out of America, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas Tana, boom, she went to the best schools in South Africa and in the United Kingdom. And when she goes to America, the sun shines out of various parts of her body, right? So this preference. So when I'm not being like crude and saying every Black person but your own, because it extends to beyond the Black community, right? It's even a preference for Asians over Asian Americans, people who are hyphenated Spanish speakers versus Chicanos and Puerto Ricans, right? It's this preference, and I find it's also true here in the United Kingdom, and I find that it's true also in Sweden. Like whenever they have people of color that are domestic, that they are not preferred over people who are foreigners. So, but the dual thing with Tana having gone to the best schools in the UK and South Africa is that they can feel sorry for her because, of apartheid. And she's from Africa. So she's inherently less. So what I think the mechanism behind this is the myth of white intellectual superiority and the maintenance of whiteness, right? So if I went to the same schools, the best schools in the US, and I show up and I'm actually smarter than most of the people in the department, or certainly more clever, then that's a threat to their idea of white intellectual superiority. If I were slightly not as smart and downtrodden, like if I actually came from the underclass, which, from the way I speak English, you can tell I'm not from the underclass, right? Then they can still feel good about themselves. They can feel like they're rescuing me or saving me. But when I'm a threat to their sense of intellectual superiority, it becomes a problem. And I find that this is particularly true in the physical sciences, and explains a lot of the lack of diversity in terms of domestic diversity being hired into, physical sciences in the United States, or physical sciences in the UK, or physical sciences in Sweden. Those are kind of the three places where I've spent time. So that's very academic. So now I can personalize it, which I did speak about how in South Africa, I had whiteness in South Africa like you would not believe. And I was like, no wonder they won't want to give this up. This is great, being perceived as being like, I'm American. I'm not a black American. I'm American first, right? And I'm smart, and people listen to what I said. And but there was ageism. I did encounter ageism, and also there was a gender aspect too. But it was not in the context of being because when I was teaching in South Africa, I was back in a physics department, right? So it was ageism, right? Because I was obviously a very self-confident woman. How could I be young? And I'm like, because I'm not young, right? I'm not young, right? So there was ageism. Once people got onto how old I actually was, then I got another level of respect because, there's a respect for elders in South Africa. But gender-wise, whoo, man, I always tell everybody, very, very honest, thank goodness I went to South Africa married, because they had men hated me. They hated me. I was just too much. So that's for another time.
Thank you all for your comments. We're gonna go over a little bit over to about, my time was probably 8:05. But I'm gonna quickly say that I understand what all of you are saying, especially about traveling the world. I had a time in Serbia where, as all of you know, there aren't any Black people there, and there was a woman that was hosting us, and she was like, "Oh my God, you all are so beautiful, so this, so that." And so as time went on, it got progressively worse. By the time the trip ended, she said, "I want to take a picture of you all and show my grandchildren, because my grandchildren never seen Black people before." And so me and one of the women who was from Kenya, we just kind of looked like, "Girl, what?" So it was definitely, we noticed that, the experience there was a little bit different, because the younger people loved us, right? The younger people loved us so very much, but the older people were very confused. They were staring at us. I even saw somebody that looked like me, and he was staring at me, and I'm like, "What you staring at me for? Is it because we never seen another Black person here, or what? What's the word, right?" But when we went to Italy, we had a obviously better experience, because that was everybody in Italy. We was waving to Black people we didn't even know, because we were just like, "That's our sister. We don't know you. You're from across the world. Wherever you're from, we love you." Right.
That's what you got to do.
Exactly. That's definitely what you have to do. And so one thing that I did notice within Serbia, Romania, all when we traveled there, the one thing that I did notice was how important their culture was. And so I look back and I look and I think about their, I think about our culture as a community, as a diaspora, and how they feel strongly about their ancestors. And so I want to ask all of you within 2 minutes, keep it to 2 minutes, please. As a Black person, how did choosing astronomy bring you closer to your ancestors? And if it did, right, how did this really help, like, push you to learn more about cultural astronomy?
All right, I can start. I can start. So, being in astronomy, as you go higher and higher in astronomy, there's less and less Black people. So, before I started my PhD, I had spent, I'd traveled around the world and spent 5 months just knocking around in Africa. And so, as I was getting a very, very difficult PhD in very, very difficult social circumstances, I was questioning, is this what I want to do? I mean, do I want to continue on this track where everything's going to be a fight? Nothing's going to be easy. Like, every time I walk into a room, I'm going to have to establish authority, and, it's going to be some sort of like verbal fight almost every time. And I have a colleague here at University of Edinburgh who very eloquently put it as the male advantage, right? So when a man walks in the room, they don't have to establish authority. They're given it, right? And then layered on top of that is the other identities, of being Black in America, descended from slaves in America. I'm not from an immigrant family. I'm descended from American slaves. And that sense of entitlement that everybody has, that they have more of a right to be in the room than I do. I'm like, this country was built on the back of my ancestors, right? I didn't have a choice in being in America. And yet they feel like they, not only, do they feel like they're entitled, I'm going over the 2 minutes already, they're entitled to be in the room more than I am. They tell me that my time will come. I have to wait and I'm like, excuse me, but remember, you are from an immigrant family. Like, you're 1 or 2 generations. I've been here. I have been here. My family has been here the whole time. And the most infuriating thing to me is just how pleased white people are when they can just teach me a little something, right? Just like, oh, Jarita, you really shouldn't do that. And then they like feel all very good about themselves that they've taught the Black person, as if I'm a child, right? This infantilizing. So anyway, back to the ancestors. So my ancestors were American slaves, right? I was in this field where I was moving further and further away from the Black community. So boom, reset. I'm becoming a cultural astronomer with an expertise in Africa. And of course, everything's been wonderful since then, and I learned more and more and more about, and then the whole thing is now the thing that I have to fight for is when people are like, okay, let's get somebody somebody African to talk about African cultural astronomy. And I have to look at them and say, I'm actually not African, right? I'm American, right? Or I get money for, like, especially it was complicated when I was living in South Africa, because they have money set aside to bring scholars, African scholars over. And I'm like, but, you're bringing an American scholar over from Africa. This is hardly fair. So I just want to end with that.
For me, I would say studying astronomy and getting into the practice of thinking about the astronomical scales in both time and space made me feel connected to not just like my more immediate ancestors who were also slaves in America, but every one of my ancestors, like back to when people weren't even like really human yet. Like, I love thinking about how the night sky is dynamic, but it hasn't really changed that much in the last like 100,000 years. And so I love looking at Orion. That's why I have this tattoo. I love looking at Orion and thinking about all of the billions of people who have also looked up at Orion across the globe, because it's along the equatorial line. Like yeah, deep connection to everyone is what astronomy has given me.
So for me, I think from a cultural perspective and connecting myself to my roots and my heritage and so on, I think for me, astronomy has allowed me the space to be able to explore and really think about what science is, where it comes from, how it's a social and human construct, and really uncover kind of the contributions that people have made from all around the world, rather than the very narrow history that we're taught in schools, and that there's not enough time in a Black History Month to be able to tell these stories. It's given me the opportunity to really start to get to know that, that astronomy is something that all peoples, like you've just said, Moya, all people have grappled with, have thought about, have used in some way to explain their place on the planet, to move forward as a society and as a culture and as civilization. But also it's humbling. It's extremely humbling. And it's also really for me an opportunity to get to know different people and to bring them into the fold, especially people who think science isn't for them. And so kind of that opportunity to give back and say, actually, science is for everyone, and here's why, because these people have been doing it and they've used it in this way, and here's all this knowledge that that's been hidden or erased, or and it also, as someone who came up in the beginning through the SciComm route, especially, I'm very interested in languages and how it affects how you think, how you see yourself in the world, and all this kind of stuff. And astronomy is a place where you can, when you do this kind of incorporation of Indigenous astronomy, or you start to decolonize your curriculum and you start to use the constellation names for the place where you're at, rather than the normal constellation, the normal ones that we taught in school, the Greek and Roman names that have no place really, in a very literal sense, in say in Southern Africa, where I'm from. Half the constellations you can't see, so they're irrelevant, and they oriented the wrong way, so they don't reflect what's in the books, don't necessarily reflect our lived reality. And now doing a more decolonized take on astronomy, we start to connect what we see and our lived experience with the science. And I think that's really powerful, and something that I don't think I would have necessarily gone so deep into if it hadn't also been for the protest movements in South African universities, the Rhodes Must Fall decolonization movements that were going on while I was a postdoc at the University of Cape Town, where we had to burn some things to get people's attention. But this idea that, the sciences were removed from there, and that brought me right into the core of this, like, how do we actually decolonize astronomy, decolonize science, so that the people who did the work, and the work that, was done before our languages were taken away from us and we were silenced, how do we put that back into the history books, into the science textbooks, so that people can know their history, know their culture, know that that lie that, there was no innovation, no civilization, no technical know-how in Africa, that's a lie, that's a blatant lie. And we need to publicize the work that we're doing from ancient times to now, because a lot of people lose sight of the fact that when we talk about Indigenous cultures, we're talking still about living cultures. Like, people are still speaking those languages, people are still, carrying those beliefs and that knowledge, albeit not in a way that was thriving maybe 500 years ago, but we can work towards restoring that pride and restoring that knowledge again.
Okay, Cheyenne, you got anything?
I just want to say I just love this conversation, because I did a history of astronomy class, and the first thing that came out of my lecturer's mouth was, so we're just gonna focus on like Eurocentric views because that's what influenced like the astronomy we know today. And that was that. And the rest of the module was, you know, Galileo and all those like European scientists and the great work that they did. And it kind of brings me back to what Moya was saying about the fact that the stars, like the skies haven't changed for so long, for like human existence. It hasn't changed that much. It's very hard to believe that you would have people all over the world seeing the same sky, and they wouldn't have the same curiosity, they wouldn't have the same kind of fire to study it and note it and research it. It's only the Europeans that decided, let's make this into a science. So that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So it's really refreshing to hear this conversation.
That always boils my blood so much, because
The
we know, we
eye roll
have
said it
evidence. Yeah.
The eye roll of the whole entire panel said it all. It definitely said it all. So we actually are going to 9:30, but I definitely want to make sure people can do stuff in the Q&A. So I'm going to ask some more personal questions, and Cheyenne are switching out at this time. So in 2 minutes, ladies, 2 minutes or less. Dr. Tana Joseph, so last year you were with us on a panel, which we enjoyed because you gave us such an amazing view of how we've seen the indigenous culture of Africa. And so what we want to know is, like, how should the indigenous culture of Africa be preserved, especially since they've influenced all of us across the globe, right? The way that they have influenced us, and even with the transatlantic slave trade, has always still been instilled in us, even the way we guide ourselves, the way we think, the way we talk, the way we dance, the way we do every single thing, right? How can this be preserved? But also, how have things changed since we last spoken with you? And how can we do things to preserve this culture without influencing cultural appropriation?
So yeah, that's a really great question. And when I did a bit of research on this, and I'm happy to say that the way things have changed, not necessarily since we last spoke, but that I wasn't aware of, is that in South Africa, for instance, we have 11 official spoken languages. Sign language, South African Sign Language, has just been added as the 12th official language of South Africa. And so from an accessibility and equity point of view, that's really fantastic, bringing sign language into the fold and making it a legally recognized official language. But also not necessarily official languages, but I'm just checking here my notes. We have added the number of languages that schools can offer as part of their formal curriculum. We are about to add Khoi, Nama, and San. So those three languages, Khoi, Nama, and San, are three indigenous South African languages that are being added to school curricula, as well as Swahili, which is the most spoken indigenous language across Africa. It's mostly spoken in sort of Southeast and East Africa. But I guess in the spirit of Pan-Africanism and in the spirit of unity and literally facilitating dialogue, we're also adding that to our options for languages in school. And so the languages are very geographically specific. So where I come from, in the provinces around Cape Town, where I'm from, Xhosa is the most spoken Nguni language. The Nguni family of languages includes Xhosa, Zulu, Sotho, and so on, and a few others. Zulu is the most spoken Nguni language. In fact, the most spoken first language in South Africa. And these are already readily available in various areas in South Africa, in the schools, and part of the school curriculum. And so now we're adding these indigenous languages, we're adding Swahili, and so that children can learn in their mother tongue, and that boosts, literacy rates, it boosts engagement and so on. So it's from a government sort of development and education standpoint, we're adding this, but it also will obviously then make it easier for us to engage in indigenous astronomy and sciences as well, not just indigenous astronomy, but all kinds of indigenous knowledge systems, if we are empowered to speak these languages. Because what fundamentally happened, the kind of disconnect that happened with indigenous knowledge systems is that when colonization happened, subjugated peoples were forbidden from speaking their language. And if you come from a mostly or almost exclusively oral tradition and oral culture, taking people's language away is not just preventing that language from propagating, but prevents knowledge from propagating. It destroys families, it destroys cultures, it destroys civilizations. And so giving that language back is extremely powerful, not just for the sciences or for astronomy, but on every single level, because it's much easier to learn. I believe they say on the internet, this might be misappropriated, that Nelson Mandela said, if you speak to someone in a language that they know, you capture their head. But if you speak to someone in their own language, then you capture their heart. And so we're trying to get back to what's at the heart of us, at the heart of our humanity, at the heart of our culture is our language. And bringing that back into the schools formally is a really good step in the right direction to support that.
That is so awesome. I'm so glad we can do that now. I'm so happy to see that they're getting the well-respect and love that they deserve. Moya, so on your PBS YouTube series, Fate and Fable, where you discuss different folklore, folk tales from all over the world, what will be your favorite folklore and how does this translate to you as a Black science communicator?
Oh, so I don't think I could pick a particular region from the world, but I do have a few themes in folklore that I really love. And I love that you can see it across the world too. I love themes of duality, and more than just two, like triality, I love when multiple ideas or concepts or identities can exist as one, because like, hello, I have a lot of identities existing in this one body. And I also like it, this is like tying into my identity as a Black person. Rigid binaries are a construct of white supremacy. This is not something that has been a part of other like indigenous and Black and brown cultures throughout the world traditionally. And so when I get to learn about dual figures from mythology, I did an episode all about Yoruba mythology, and I got to learn about, their supreme creator god, who is often kind of compared to the Abrahamic God, but is very different. And in another episode on trickster gods, I got to learn about Anansi, who is the trickster god from West African mythology. And Anansi is neither good nor evil. Anansi is just like chaos, And so I love thinking about cultures around the world that have been able to hold multiple ideas in their head at once for one figure, because we cannot be stuck into one small, well-defined box, and our ancestors and other myths from around the world show that.
Shania.
I was like, period, like, just, yeah, love that. We've talked a lot about, so Maurice mentioned her TV series. We know Dr. Holbrook and Dr. Joseph, you talked about research. I guess all the stuff that you guys have talked about and the amazing work that you're doing and all you're giving to our community. The question is, where can we find it for the people listening? Where's the best place to find your work, be able to kind of dive deeper into all of the stuff we talked about today?
Right. So I have 2 YouTube channels, and if you want to see all the information about, African Indigenous astronomy, cultural astronomy, that's going to be on the Cultural Astronomy channel under Astro Holbrook. And then I have all my travel stuff over on the Science Tourist. And now there's going to be a 3rd channel, which is, the Astro Moves project, where you'll see lots of pictures of Tana and other people that I've been interviewing about their career decision making and their intersectional identities. So that's how you find me. I'm very, very bad right now about social media and keeping websites up to date. Maybe over the summer I will, revamp everything. GoDaddy's like, Jarita, you need to pay for this. this, you know. So, but it's to the point where I'm of the age where it's like, who can I pay? Is there someone I can just pay to do all this? Because I used to do it all myself, but it's beyond me right now. So maybe I'll get a graduate student. And you guys notice I have a call out right now for graduate students. Applications are due next week. If you have a good idea for a research proposal, please send it along to me and I'll help you edit it to make it appropriate for getting your PhD. The advantage is PhDs in the UK are 3 years. 3 years, start to finish, 3 years. So you're not spending 6 years of your life trying to get your PhD. So think about it if you're interested in cultural astronomy or studying all the bad behavior of astrophysicists or something in between. You know, there's people who are studying dark skies and satellite constellations, you know. It's open. So I give everybody else a chance to talk.
Yeah, I can go. I'll say, if you want to check out Jarita, Upwork, or Fiverr, you can absolutely hire someone to do a website for you. That's the technology exists. I am extremely Googleable, and I am perhaps too online. So you can find me on any of the social medias. I'm Go Astro Mo, or you could go to my website, moyamiktir.com. It has all of my work on it. I host podcasts. I host this YouTube show for PBS. I write books. I do a lot of talking, but you can find me anywhere on the internet at Go Astro Mo.
Can I be on your podcast, please?
Oh my God, yes.
I did an episode with her, so yes.
Yeah, awesome.
I'll reach out.
I think, yeah, I'm on Twitter, I guess, but not as much anymore. I'm trying to be a lot more on LinkedIn now. Just trying that. Sorry, there's a bunch of students walking past the door singing in Dutch. They're very excited. It's very warm here today and sunny, so people are out in the street. So apologies if you can hear that. They're just very enthusiastic here. Climate change has come to Western Europe and has made their summers a lot warmer than they normally used to, and they are loving it. So, they can be forgiven because normally the summers 15 years ago when I was starting my PhD, the summers in the UK were like 25 degrees Celsius was like a warm day, or like, so 22 degrees was a warm day, 22 degrees centigrade is about 72 degrees Fahrenheit. That was a warm day. And they would like, you know, lotion on themselves and lie out in the sun. And now it gets up to, you know, into the, I guess you would say the 80s, high 80s, low 90s regularly. And they still haven't gotten used to it. They're loving it. It's very cute. So yeah, okay, they've gone now. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Tana D. Joseph. If you find me on Instagram, it's the same handle. I rarely post on Instagram, but I am there. If that's your jam, I'll reply to messages or whatever, or tags. I'm always happy to talk to people. I'm always happy to engage with the public or with any, you know, STEM organizations or STEM practitioners. I have my own company called Astrocoms, and our website is astrocoms.com. And I offer my services as a science communication consultant, or STEM communication consultant, or equity, diversity and inclusion and decolonization consultant. Some of my favorite things to do is to work with creatives. So script writers, game developers, things like that, people in the creative sphere who don't necessarily have a STEM background, but maybe they're working on some sci-fi stuff or things of that nature, or STEM related things, and they need someone to put the technical expertise back in. And I really love working with especially people who are doing sci-fi TV shows and stuff. That's been super fun to be able to merge the creative and the technical together like that with interesting results. So I do a lot of that kind of work. So yeah, check out astrocoms.com to learn a bit more about me and about the work that I'm doing. My research work isn't on there, but that's also coming along really well still. I still do find time sometimes to do science on small black holes in binary systems with other stars.
Yeah, Ashley said it right. You guys are all doing a lot. Like it's amazing and it's impressive and it's just so inspiring to see. We have one final question from us before we open up the Q&A. So if anybody in the audience has questions, you can start putting them into the Q&A box and we'll save some time for those. But one last question from us is we've talked about how being a Black person in astronomy has shaped your journey. Do you think there's anything from Black and African culture that can now be applied to astronomy today that'll be useful? So kind of flipping it back. Yeah, let's go, Dr. Holbrook.
Right. So I was treated very poorly during my PhD. I think I've been very public about that. And I wondered why I was being treated so poorly, given that there's a long history of observing the sky in Africa. Like the connection between Black people and the sky it's ancient. It really is going back, forever. So why was I the freak for being the Black person who was studying the sky and interested in the sky? I later found out that for the history of the United States, for the number of Black women to get PhDs in astrophysics who were descended from American slaves, I was the second. So maybe I was a little bit, it's kind of like the reality of the historical moment. I got my PhD in 1997. I didn't realize that so few Black women had done that in the United States at that time. So maybe they were okay thinking that I was a freak, but that's no excuse to treat me so badly. So now I think that because I have the book African Cultural Astronomy, and people can see that it's nothing new. For Black people to study the sky is nothing new. And so I hope that it is making us, as we navigate our astrophysics career, less of an anomaly and somewhat more accepted. And you younger people can tell me whether that's the case or not. But that was my goal.
For me, I think this comes up sometimes as a talking point in equity, diversity, and inclusion, debates and panels and seminars and so on, is this the tension, at least in the global North science academia context, of religion versus science. And I think I may have spoken about this before on this panel, but something that I feel that the global North can learn from science and scientists in Africa is how there is no tension. It's very common in South Africa, for instance, to go to local conferences and people to have Bible quotes on their presentations. And people, we had a talk here in the Netherlands at our Netherlands Astronomy, Equity and Inclusion Committee monthly seminars, where we had Dr. Mtutuzeli Zampa talk about the Human Capital Development Program that he runs for the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory, and as part of the South African Square Kilometre Radio Telescope Project, where we're trying to get more Black young people and also women into astronomy and into radio astronomy, because we're building the world's biggest, not just the world's biggest telescope, the world's biggest science experiment in Southern Africa and in other parts of Africa. And he's also a pastor, and he has a PhD in nanotechnology and microbiology. And here there's this tension, when I say here, I mean in the Netherlands and across Western Europe, and possibly also in the US. You can speak to that a bit better, where there's this tension, how do we, people are religious and we don't want to offend them, and the religious people are resistant to science and all this. And I'm like, well, come to Africa and we'll show you that. Go to, an African astronomers Facebook or Twitter page, say their Twitter bio will say, child of God, astronomer, and there's no tension there. There's, these two things exist in plenty of scientists across Africa, where, or if they're Muslim, they and astronomers, that makes even more sense, because we know that where Islam started in the Middle East, almost a millennium ago, they were some of the first astronomers, and that looking at the sky and tracking the phase of the moon is integral to practicing Islam. So there's no tension, there's no there's no, like, what do we say, false hard binaries. It's a lot more fluid, it's a lot more integrated, it's a lot more holistic. And so that is something that I would like to an attitude and a change of paradigm and perception and understanding that I would like to permeate throughout the sciences in general, that there doesn't need to be this tension, that you're creating this false dichotomy that doesn't need to exist, and that there are thousands of people on the African continent who carry those two fundamental pieces of themselves together, and they are at peace, and they are doing amazing science, and they are and they have their deeply held spiritual beliefs as well. And so hopefully that's something that maybe we can talk about at the International Astronomical Union's General Assembly, which will be held in Africa for the first time next year.
Wow. Jarita, did you want to say something?
Oh, it's an aside. We lost a historian of science who also had an astrophysics background last week, Owen Gingrich, who was at Harvard. And so we discussed personally, me and Owen, maybe like 20 years ago, this religion and science, dichotomy. And he's written about the fact that he was a Christian, he was quite religious. And at one point, he was thinking about not going into astrophysics. And I think his priest or his pastor said, "So you're going to leave the whole field for the atheists to do?" And so he decided to go on. But he wasn't very public about, and this is something that I also told my students, that, it's still two different worlds, right? It's still like, you're performing as an astrophysicist or you're performing as a religious person. Those still two different worlds. So it's like, you don't proselytize when you're, it's two different worlds. So he was very, very quiet about it, but he wrote a book about it. I think this book is called God's Universe. So I just put that out there, and we're gonna miss him. He was one of those kind people.
Yeah, I met him when I was in college. I was considering him as an advisor, but it didn't work out. But yeah, that's so sad to hear. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, touching on Tana's point, the duality of being able to have faith and knowledge of science at the same time, I think would be extremely useful. And I think if I could broaden that or generalize that a little bit, there's a lot of flexibility that is a part of Black culture that I think would be really nice if we could carry it into academia. So flexibility in this, like, accepting multiple paradigms thing, flexibility in terms of what type of person you're allowed to be. I feel like Black cultures across the diaspora are less prescriptive than academia. There's this like picture of what an academic is supposed to be like. There is not as much of a picture of what a Black person is supposed to be like. And so we're much more welcoming of different expressions, and like empathy and community engagement and mutual aid. If we could take some of those concepts and bring them into academia, I think it would be a much better place. But I know I'm just preaching to the choir.
In some ways it's already there. It's just not extended to you.
Oh,
did I say that?
Oh, wow.
You know what I'm saying, right? It's that whiteness thing, right? It's like a club that you're just not a part of, right? And it's one of the things that came out of I suspected that it was there before I did the research by Astromove's project, but those bridging funds where, oh, my PhD doesn't have a postdoc yet. Let's look around for some money, to keep them researching for another year until they can get something. Extended to men and primarily white men, right? So I think I found one case where it was extended to a woman, and I have 44 interviews. One case where it was extended to a woman. So, there is a club and it's very caring. It's just not extended to us, right?
And
but I also say that this should be extended to other people, right? I have to make policy suggestions like, and I think even for AAS, I suggested, it'd be nice if you had these fellowships that are just for like 1 year as people are trying to get their next postdoc, these bridging funds. So,
I mean, when we talk about these bridging funds, and I'll say this is somebody on CSMA that has brought this up multiple times. When we talk about whether we're talking about bridge to the doctorate program or whatever you have, right? And I want to say June 30th is the deadline for the Annie Jump Cannon Award, which not a single Black woman has ever won, right? And the one that we thought would have won, it went to her who had the Nobel Prize, but we're going to have a later conversation about that at a later date, right? And so, yeah, I think we all know who I'm talking. Yeah, it should have went to Reva, but let's talk about that another day. And so, with this being said, we did ask about like what's going on with the bridge funding because it all came down at once. And so we are asking like these different questions of like, how can we help the community in ways that are more grassroots, in which I've been, which, myself, Keyshawn, Nicole, we all have been like really, really thinking about like, okay, let's think about abolishing the falls. Let's think about how we can help Black people. Let's think about how we can help Indigenous people. Let's help out, we've been thinking about these things about how can we serve and help and create these things. And so we have seen pushback. I can confirm, right? And so we hope with this next administration that, and it's not pushback out on like, oh my God, no, right? It's just been like, not yet, right? Not,
It's always not
we,
yet.
we have to wait our turn, right?
Mhm.
exactly, right?
Yeah.
And also, I'll just quickly say, because we do have to do the Q&A, I'll just quickly say that we also are thinking and looking at like, all of us are busy, right? We all are busy on this committee. We all are working multiple jobs. I'm wearing about 65 different hats, right? And so, and all of us are doing different things. And so sometimes we can't get around to those questions, or if we do get around to those questions, it's just, let's think about it. And so I do want to leave off here saying that we should have, these things for, as Drita said, for people that need a postdoc for a year and need to get to where they have to go, because like, that's how we lose Black people within the field. And so Drita, you and I can talk a little bit later because I have someone that I may end up sending you, speaking of which. And so like, it's just, we can't afford to lose any more Black people in astronomy, whether it's cultural astronomy, whether it's folklore in astronomy, whether it's science communication in astronomy. We don't have the luxury of losing any Black people at this capacity. Cheyenne?
Yeah, I'm just like very emotional right now, very overwhelmed. Like this panel is honestly, it always, like I did it last year, one of my favorite panels for Black Space Week. We don't have much time left, so we can move over to the Q&A now. The Q&A box. We have from Gabrielle Forbes, we have some love for Dr. Moya. And she just said, I'm so happy I got to hear you at this webinar. We spoke in 2021. And while she was doing a gap year in Tanzania in East Africa. As you inspire me to stick with astrophysics in undergrad and expose me to science communication. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you stuck with it.
And she's also saying that she wants to share that she is going to do a study abroad exchange program in Egypt for her physics/astronomy major, which is really cool. So she said she's super excited to be culturally and scientifically immersed in Africa, and she's from Miami. So that should be a really, really good experience. Thanks for joining, Gabrielle. Thanks for sharing that with us. And we have a question from our beloved Caprice. And Tana mentioned this earlier, the IAU General Assembly that's happening in South Africa in 2023. Says, asking for a question for all the panelists, what are you looking forward to regarding that conference, and what ways would they encourage folks to learn more about cultural or Indigenous astronomy while they're visiting for that conference?
I think
Well,
Tana
I,
already said some
yeah.
few words, but I'm actually not planning to be there, believe it or not, because I proposed a panel and it was not accepted. So I'm like, ugh, I'm not going to go. It was Gendered Astronomy, Gendered Sky, and you can find it online. It's, basically looking at the gendered aspects of cultural astronomy and indigenous astronomy knowledge, but also looking at the latest numbers that are coming out of research on women in astronomy, so gendered, and other diversity in astronomy. And I have to say that my Astromoves project has every one of those LBQTIA plus polyamorous in my sample of 44 people. So I know what gender really is.
Um, Terrifying confession, I too might not be at this I might not be at this conference. It'll be in my hometown. I will be in my hometown because that's also the week that I'm turning 40. So I'll be there to celebrate with my family wherever my job is, but my next job might be outside of academia, and so I might not I might not be able to go because it's no longer my job. So so yeah, I I know that will be a very well attended conference, despite the fact that don't forget this is in the middle of this is in winter in South Africa, so it's not going to be a nice summer conference in that regard, and it's also typically the wettest month in Cape Town, and so you're not going to be drinking cocktails by the beach. It's not going to be that kind of conference, but I'm hoping that there will be I know that there will be a strong component of course showcasing human capital development, certainly, and hopefully a strong component showcasing indigenous astronomy. I'm not sure. The thing that happened, something weird happened at the last IAU General Assembly as part of the handover for for this one. They do a handover thing where they decided the people who were the organizers of 2022 did like a presentation for the organizers of 2024, and they really did this weird focus on like basically like the colonizing aspect of astronomy, where they where they were like, oh, the white people brought astronomy to South Africa, blah blah blah, and it was very weird. I didn't see it, but I heard about it from someone, and I hope that this will be rectified. And I know the people that are organizing it, and they're putting a lot of effort into it. What I would like to see there is really good representation of African scientists. So something that I flagged up and that I am following up on with the organizers is that we need to make sure that the African scientists traveling from within Africa to Cape Town have their visas and paperwork sorted out in a very timely fashion, because that is something that is it's a big barrier for Africans studying anywhere in the world. And so even Africans in Africa trying to do science. So this is something that we really need to get on top of. And it's something, like I said, that I flagged with the organizers, and I'm doing some follow-up on to make sure that we get as many African astronomers and science communicators and anyone related to astronomy who wants to come to this historic IAU General Assembly to be present at the meeting. And so, so we're working on that, and we're trying to optimize that, because I would hate for it to be the case that it looks like a typical, like, not that there's anything wrong with it, but like a AAS meeting or something like that, where it's like,
And there's something wrong with it.
Yeah, where you're the Taraji P. Henderson standing there, the image from Hidden Figures where she's there all alone. I don't want it to look like that. I want it to look, when you look at it, and be like, this is an African conference. So yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. I remember the first time that I was at a astrophysics conference where I was not, other than AAS, but it was a smallest workshop, and there were like 6 or 7 Black people. I was like, what the heck is going on? And so that was in Kingston, Canada. And Claude from University of Cape Town had brought all his students. That's why there were all those black students, you know, that were there at this conference. And that was, I think it was 2018. It might have been 2017. Yeah. So, and that was just shocking to me. I was like, oh my gosh, this feels so different.
Ashley, you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I was going to let Moya say something if Moya is deciding to go. No, okay.
No, I'm not.
So with this being said, you know, we're really sad because we are planning on going, right? Well, that's the plan, at least. And so that's the plan, at least, right? But also, for the first time in 20 years, in 2024 is actually probably a big year for Black people in astronomy culturally, because for the first time in 20 years, we're going to a Black city for AAS. And so if you aren't going there, at least I can say, come to New Orleans, you're going to Noya, and going and having so much
Yes.
fun. And I think this is going to be the first time where a lot of Black people are just like, hello, I feel safe. I'm in a Black city.
When is the AAS
This
in
is the
your-
winter meeting. I'm planning on being there.
in January?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll be
okay.
there.
Yes, I'll be there.
I love
I'll be
knowledge.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm actually proposing a panel on astronomy during pandemics. So, from a historical and a contemporary perspective, right? So, not just COVID, but like the Spanish flu and the plague, and right. So I'm proposing. So I'll be there. I love New Orleans, but I wanted to say that. I don't know, Tana. You want to tell him how white Cape Town is?
Yeah, I was just about to say, Cape Town is probably the whitest African city. So don't be alarmed, y'all. There's white people. So even
And they're large and in charge.
even in the context just of South Africa, I think it's the only city that we have where Black people aren't an outright majority. So it's also the place where I'm about to use a word that will be offensive to some people, especially in the US, and I need you to understand that this is how we self-identify, and it's okay for us to use this word. I am colored. My Blackness is actually, depending on who you ask in South Africa, not necessarily 100% verified. And colored people exist. So we are a cultural group, an ethnicity, rather necessarily than a racial group. But under apartheid, we were designated as a racial group. And but we exist basically only in Cape Town. Like the vast majority of us, there's like 10 of us in Johannesburg, but we mostly exist overwhelmingly in Cape Town. So you're going to meet people who are brown, but don't identify as being Black. Some of us do, some of us don't. Some of us look like white people. It's a very it's a very Creole mix of people. So there'll be Black South Africans there. There'll be lots of colored South Africans there, and there'll be and white South Africans, and it's almost in equal parts. So I would say like maybe even Atlanta or like New Orleans, those are blacker cities than the city that I grew up in. And so, yeah, so don't be alarmed when you see all these white people. They will be out in force. And so this is why it's so important that we have as many, especially African astronomers and Black astronomers and astronomers of color at the meeting as possible to really to make that change, because it does run the risk of looking a bit too typical if we're not careful, which is why I'm kind of on the visa thing at the moment.
Oh, love that. Ashley, do you want anything you want to close us off? We're a bit over time now.
Yeah, we're a bit over time, but I do want to say thank you all so much for joining us. Okay, if we don't see you in South Africa, so that means we're going to see you in New Orleans. Well, New Orleans is first and then South Africa. So I would love to see all of you all once again for Jarita and Moya in person. And Tana, we've never met in person. And no, we have to start back getting to our meetings. I've been extremely busy. I'll catch you up on everything later. So with that being said, thank you all for joining us. Thanks to Bittman Barbara, Cecilia, DeBlois, Laquetta, all of you all for helping us translate and interpret and being the captioner for all of this amazing work. Thank you for the entire week, because this is our last session that we're doing, I believe virtually, if I'm not mistaken. So we are getting ready to close out the week. We do have another event coming up later on today. But thank you all so much for joining us. Again, my name is Ashley Walker. I am the founder and president of Black and Astro. And joining me is my amazing social media director, Miss Cheyenne Polis, who does all of everything else. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to the panelists. And y'all have a great Saturday. Love you all. Mwah. Bye.
Guys, bye.